held captive on the ranch. The rancher's actions with the young Apache will take your breath away. The sun was just beginning to rise over the wide desert when the rancher stepped out of his small wooden house. The land around him was quiet, dry, and endless. Dust moved slowly with the wind, and the sky carried a pale orange color that promised another hard day. This ranch had been his whole world for many years. He worked alone, spoke little, and trusted almost no one. Life had taught him that silence was safer than hope. The ranch sat far from any town. Neighbors were miles away, and help was never close. The rancher had chosen this life on purpose. Long ago, he had lost his family and learned that the world could be cruel. Out here, among cattle, fences, and empty land, he felt some control. Every day followed the same pattern: feeding animals, fixing broken wood, checking water, and guarding what little he had. But that morning was different. Before the sun climbed high, distant voices broke the silence. Horses approached fast, kicking dust into the air. The rancher narrowed his eyes and reached for his rifle, not in anger but habit. In these lands, danger often arrived without warning. A group of men appeared at the edge of the ranch, their faces tense, their movements sharp. Between them rode a young Apache man, his hands tied, his clothes dusty, his face bruised but calm. The rancher felt a tightness in his chest. He had heard stories, too many stories, about raids, theft, and bloodshed. Fear and anger had been passed from mouth to mouth for years, until no one remembered where it began. The men shouted that cattle had gone missing and that this young man was responsible. They said they had caught him nearby and wanted justice. The Apache man did not speak. He kept his head high, his dark eyes steady. There was no begging, no shouting, no sign of weakness. That quiet strength unsettled the rancher more than anger ever could. The men argued about what should be done. Some wanted punishment. Others wanted to take him to the authorities. Trouble always followed such decisions, and the rancher knew it. Authorities were far, and tempers were already high. A single wrong move could lead to violence. After a long pause, the rancher made a choice that surprised even himself. He said the young man could stay on the ranch for now. The men protested, but the rancher stood firm. He told them it was safer this way, that things could be sorted out later. Reluctantly, they agreed and rode off, leaving behind dust, tension, and a bound stranger standing in the yard. For a long moment, neither man moved. The rancher finally stepped closer and untied the rope, but he did not fully turn his back. Trust did not come easily. He motioned toward the barn and made it clear that the young man was not free to leave. The Apache man nodded slowly, understanding without words. The day passed in uneasy silence. The rancher kept watch while working, his eyes always returning to the young man. He expected anger, maybe even an attempt to run. Instead, the Apache man followed instructions calmly. He worked with care, fixing broken wood and carrying water without complaint. His movements showed experience, not fear. As the sun burned overhead, the rancher noticed something strange. The young man treated the land with respect. He did not rush. He did not waste water. When an animal startled, he calmed it with gentle movements. These were not the actions of someone wild or careless. These were the actions of someone who understood survival. That evening, the rancher prepared a simple meal. He placed food at a distance, unsure of what to do. The Apache man waited, watching closely, then accepted it with a quiet nod. No words were spoken, but something shifted in the air. It was not trust, at least not yet, but it was not hatred either. As darkness settled, the rancher locked the barn where the young man would sleep. He felt uneasy. Memories from the past crept in, memories of times when he had judged too quickly, when fear had led to regret. He pushed them away and told himself this was only temporary. Still, sleep did not come easily. That night, the wind howled across the land. The rancher lay awake, listening. Every sound made his heart beat faster. He wondered who this young man truly was. Was he guilty? Was he a danger? Or was he simply another soul caught in a fight he did not start? Before dawn, the rancher rose again. He expected trouble but found none. The Apache man was awake, sitting quietly, waiting. There was no escape attempt, no anger in his eyes, only patience. Something about that patience unsettled the rancher more than chains ever could. As the new day began, the rancher realized that this was no longer just about missing cattle. A line had been crossed. Two men from very different worlds were now bound to the same land, the same silence, and the same uncertain future. And though neither of them knew it yet, this moment would change both their lives forever. Morning arrived slowly on the ranch, as if the land itself was unsure about what the new day would bring. The sun rose pale and quiet, spreading light over the dry earth. The rancher stepped outside, carrying a tin cup of water. He paused when he saw the young Apache man already awake, standing near the barn, waiting without being told. His posture was calm, almost respectful, yet strong. The rancher said nothing at first. He handed over the water and pointed toward the fence line that had fallen during the last storm. Work needed to be done, whether a man was free or not. The Apache man nodded once and picked up the tools without complaint. He did not rush. He studied the broken fence carefully, then began repairing it with steady hands. As the hours passed, the rancher watched closely. He expected mistakes or carelessness, but none came. The young man worked as if he had done this his whole life. He measured each piece of wood, tightened each rope with care, and made sure the fence stood strong. The rancher felt uneasy. This was not how a helpless captive behaved. By midday, the heat became heavy. The rancher noticed the young man slowing slightly, wiping sweat from his face. Without thinking too much, the rancher brought more water and placed it nearby. The Apache man accepted it with a quiet nod, his eyes briefly meeting the rancher's. There was no challenge in that look, no fear either, only awareness. They spent the afternoon working side by side, though several steps apart. No words were exchanged, but small signals passed between them. A point of the hand, a raised eyebrow, a pause before lifting something heavy. Somehow, they understood each other. That silent understanding disturbed the rancher. He had always believed such people were dangerous and untrustworthy. Yet here was proof that his beliefs might be wrong. As the sun dipped lower, a calf wandered too close to the fence and became tangled. Before the rancher could react, the Apache man moved quickly but gently. He spoke softly in his own language, calming the frightened animal. His hands were careful, never rough. Within moments, the calf was free and unharmed. The rancher felt a strange tightness in his chest. He remembered a time long ago when he had been kind like that, before loss had hardened him. He turned away quickly, pretending to adjust his hat, unwilling to face those memories. That evening, the rancher allowed the young man to eat closer than before. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, the flames crackling between them. The sound of night insects filled the air. The Apache man ate slowly, respectfully, as if following rules only he understood. When he finished, he waited, not moving until the rancher nodded toward the barn. Later, as the rancher lay awake, he listened carefully. He expected noise, movement, perhaps an escape attempt. There was nothing, only silence. Days passed like this. Work, silence, watchful eyes. The rancher began to notice small details. The Apache man never wasted food or water. He thanked the land before drinking. He watched the sky closely, reading signs of weather before clouds appeared. When the rancher struggled with an old injury in his leg, the young man noticed and slowed his pace, adjusting his work without being asked. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in. Wind tore across the ranch and rain fell hard. A section of the roof began to leak badly. The rancher climbed up to fix it but slipped, nearly falling. Without hesitation, the Apache man rushed forward and steadied the ladder, holding it firm until the rancher climbed down safely. For a long moment, the rancher stood there, breathing hard. He looked at the young man who had already stepped back, eyes lowered as if the act meant nothing. But it meant everything. That night, the rancher unlocked the barn door earlier than usual and left it open. He did not say why. The Apache man noticed but made no move to leave. He simply settled near the doorway, resting. The rancher's thoughts grew heavy. The stories he had believed all his life no longer fit the man he saw before him. This was not an enemy. This was not a criminal spirit. This was a person, young, strong, and deeply human. Yet fear still lived inside the rancher. Fear of neighbors, of authorities, of being wrong. He reminded himself that kindness could be dangerous. Trust had cost him dearly once before. The next morning, riders appeared in the distance. The rancher's heart pounded. The Apache man noticed too, but did not run. He stood still, waiting. The riders did not stop that day, but their presence was a warning. Trouble was not far away. As night fell again, the rancher realized something he had not expected. The young Apache man was not breaking under captivity. If anything, it was the rancher whose walls were beginning to crack. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of questions, doubts, and a growing truth neither man was ready to speak. The days that followed felt heavier than before. The work continued, the silence remained, but something beneath it had changed. The rancher no longer watched the young Apache man with only caution. Now there was curiosity, and beneath that, doubt. Every quiet moment gave his thoughts more space to grow. One afternoon, while repairing a water trough, the rancher noticed the young man studying a set of tracks in the dirt. He crouched low, touching the ground lightly, his face focused. After a moment, he pointed toward the hills and shook his head slowly. The rancher did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. These tracks were old. Whatever had happened days ago did not begin here. The rancher felt a slow pull inside his chest. That night, as they sat near the fire, he finally spoke more than a few words. His voice was rough from years of little use. He asked, slowly and carefully, about the missing cattle. He did not accuse. He only asked. The Apache man looked into the fire for a long time. Then, with broken English and simple gestures, he began to explain. He spoke of traveling to check on family who lived near the hills. He spoke of seeing strange riders, not from his people. He spoke of fear, of hiding, of being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He shook his head firmly when he spoke of stealing. His voice did not rise. He did not plead. He only told his truth. The rancher listened in silence. Every word struck him like a stone. He remembered how quickly the men had blamed the young man. He remembered how easily he himself had believed them. Shame crept in, slow and cold. That night, sleep refused to come. The rancher lay staring at the ceiling, memories returning uninvited. He remembered being young, blamed for something he had not done, punished because it was easier than finding the truth. He had sworn never to be part of such injustice again, and yet here he was. The next morning he brought food without being asked. He allowed the Apache man to eat at the table outside the house. It was a small thing, but it felt like crossing a line. Neither of them spoke, but the air between them felt lighter. Later that day, the rancher rode out to the area where the cattle had gone missing. He studied the land carefully, just as the Apache man had done. For the first time, he truly looked. The tracks did not match what he had been told. They led farther north, away from Apache territory. His stomach tightened. When he returned, he said nothing at first. He simply sat down and stared at the ground. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. He admitted that things did not add up. He admitted he might have been wrong. The Apache man listened quietly. He did not show victory or anger. He only nodded, as if he had expected this moment all along. Over the following days, the rancher loosened his control. He no longer locked the barn at night. He allowed the young man to move freely within sight. Trust did not arrive suddenly, but it took root, slow and careful. They began to speak more, simple words, short sentences. The Apache man shared pieces of his life, his mother, his younger sister, the land his people protected. He spoke with pride, not bitterness. The rancher shared little but enough. He spoke of loss, of why he chose isolation, of the fear that had followed him for years. One evening, the rancher noticed a small wound on the young man's hand, raw and swollen. Without a word, he brought clean cloth and water. The Apache man allowed the care, watching closely. When it was done, he touched his chest lightly and said a quiet word of thanks. That simple moment broke something open inside the rancher. He realized then that keeping this man captive, even gently, was still wrong. The truth was clear now. The young man did not belong here. He never had, but the outside world did not change just because his heart did. Riders were seen more often now. Voices carried on the wind. Questions were being asked. The rancher knew time was running out. If the truth came out the wrong way, the young man would suffer for it. That night the rancher stood alone under the stars, staring at the wide, silent land. He felt fear stronger than ever. But he also felt something else, responsibility. By morning, he knew a choice was coming. And no matter the cost, he could no longer pretend he did not know what was right. The Apache man watched him closely that day, sensing the change. Their eyes met across the yard, and for the first time there was no distance between them, only truth waiting to be acted upon. The morning air on the ranch carried tension heavier than usual. The sun rose slowly, casting pale light over the dry land, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The rancher knew that outside forces were drawing closer. The neighbors' suspicions had grown. Authorities were beginning to ask questions, and with each passing day, the risk to the young Apache man grew. The rancher had spent long nights wrestling with his thoughts, wondering what he should do, weighing the safety of the man against the possible consequences to himself. He had reached a decision. Standing near the fence, he watched the Apache man tending the animals, moving with quiet precision, his calm strength unbroken by days of uncertainty. The rancher knew that this was a man of patience, of dignity, someone who deserved freedom, not confinement. His heart ached with a mixture of guilt and resolve. He had waited too long. The choice was clear, even if the path forward was dangerous. For days he prepared quietly. He hid extra food, repaired a horse that had been injured, and studied the trails leading away from the ranch. Every step was deliberate. Every detail mattered. If they were to move, they would need speed, stealth, and courage. When the time came, the rancher approached the Apache man. "We leave soon," he said, his voice steady but low, careful not to alarm. The young man paused, looking up. His eyes searched the rancher's face, reading the unspoken meaning. Without words, he nodded, ready to follow, ready to trust, even in a world that had betrayed him. That night they set out under the cover of darkness. The stars hung bright in the sky, casting faint light across the land. Every step was careful, every sound measured. The rancher led the way, his heart pounding with both fear and determination. The young Apache man followed silently, his experience guiding them along hidden paths, away from the main trails where riders or townsfolk might be looking. The air smelled of earth and sage, and every rustle of leaves made them pause. The rancher felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He knew the consequences if they were caught. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt alive in a way he had not known before. He was no longer just surviving. He was acting for something greater than himself. Along the trail, they shared small moments that spoke louder than words. The Apache man helped calm a spooked horse, showing patience and skill. The rancher offered water and kept watch at every bend, ready to defend against any danger. Their movements were synchronized, a silent understanding building from days of shared work, shared struggle, and shared trust. They reached a narrow valley, a place where the land dipped and provided natural cover. Here, the rancher stopped and looked at the young man. "Almost there," he said softly. The Apache man glanced around, his dark eyes alert but calm. He had survived much, and he trusted the rancher even now in this most dangerous moment. Suddenly, distant voices echoed from above. Riders were scouting the trails, searching for them. The rancher's pulse quickened, every muscle tensed. He motioned for the young man to stay low. They pressed against the earth, hidden among rocks and shrubs. The voices passed, unaware of their presence. The rancher exhaled slowly, relief washing over him, but he knew the risk was far from over. They moved again, carefully, step by step, until the valley opened to a quiet river, a boundary that marked the edge of safer land. The rancher had chosen this path because it led toward the young man's family and community, away from the danger of authorities and angry neighbors. The river shimmered faintly in the moonlight, a silent promise of freedom just ahead. When they reached the far side, the Apache man paused. He turned to the rancher, his face calm but serious. There were no words to express what he felt, no simple way to show gratitude. Instead, he placed a hand on the rancher's shoulder, a gesture that carried everything: respect, trust, and acknowledgement of the sacrifice made on his behalf. The rancher returned the gesture, understanding that their bond had grown beyond fear and duty. It was human, real, and unbreakable. For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the water flowing, feeling the cool night air on their faces. The rancher knew that this act would change his life forever. He would face judgment, possible legal consequences, and isolation from neighbors. Yet none of that mattered now. What mattered was the young man's safety, the right choice made in the shadow of fear. The Apache man stepped forward, moving toward the forest on the other side of the river. He glanced back once, a quiet look that spoke more than words ever could. The rancher nodded, holding back the desire to call him back, knowing it was not his place. With that final glance, the young man disappeared into the trees, toward freedom and family, leaving behind the ranch, the dust, and the life of captivity. The rancher remained by the riverbank long after, staring at the reflection of stars on the water. His chest felt heavy, but it was not just with fear or regret. It was full of something new: relief, pride, a sense that he had done something meaningful. He had risked everything for the sake of what was right, and in that choice, he had found a part of himself he thought was long gone. Morning light began to break across the land as the rancher made his way back home. Each step was slower now, contemplative. He knew he would have to face the consequences soon, yet there was no regret. The trust, respect, and courage shared on that journey had left an imprint on both their lives. By the time he returned to the ranch, the world was waking up around him. Birds began to call, wind stirred the leaves, and the distant mountains glowed with sunlight. Life continued as it always had, but the rancher felt changed. Something in him had softened, grown. The act of choosing compassion over fear had reshaped his world. From that day onward, he carried the memory of the young man with him, not as a captive, but as a reminder of the power of courage, trust, and humanity. He knew that the actions taken on that night, under the stars and along hidden trails, would define his life forever. And though challenges and judgment lay ahead, he faced them with a quiet strength, knowing he had done the right thing when it mattered most. The story of that night, of the journey across the valley, and of the freedom earned would remain in his heart for the rest of his days, a testament to the truth that courage and compassion could triumph even in the harshest of circumstances. It was not an easy path, nor a safe one, but it was the right one, and for that he was at peace. The days after the young Apache man disappeared into the forest were heavy and quiet on the ranch. The land felt emptier than ever, though the cattle still grazed and the wind still moved the dust. The rancher worked with steady hands, but each task felt slower, each step more deliberate. His mind was never at rest. He replayed the journey, the night under the stars, the crossing of the river. Every choice, every risk weighed on him. He knew what he had done was dangerous, and yet he also knew it had been right. Word began to spread. Neighbors whispered. Authorities asked questions. Some came to the ranch looking for answers. The rancher remained calm, answering only what he needed to. He did not speak of the young man's escape, did not mention the paths they had taken, the hidden valley, or the river crossing. He could not. To reveal too much would put the young man at risk, and that thought alone kept him silent. Even as questions came, the rancher felt a strange sense of peace. He had acted according to his conscience, and that mattered more than fear of judgment. But the consequences were real. Supplies went missing, rumors grew louder, and some neighbors began to avoid him. They whispered that he had sheltered someone who did not belong, that he had interfered where he should not have. It was a heavy burden, but the rancher accepted it. His actions were for justice, for life, and he knew that sometimes doing what is right comes at a personal cost. Weeks passed. The land shifted from dry dust to patches of green as spring approached. Birds returned and the cattle seemed calmer. The rancher moved through the days, feeling the quiet more keenly than ever. And then one morning, something happened that changed everything again. A small group of riders approached, not with anger or suspicion, but with careful smiles and cautious gestures. At their center was the young Apache man, healthy, proud, and smiling with a quiet relief. He had returned not as a captive, but as a free man. The rancher's heart beat faster than it had in months. He stepped forward slowly, unsure if the moment would truly happen, unsure if trust could be rebuilt fully. The young man dismounted and approached without hesitation. He placed his hand lightly on the rancher's shoulder, a gesture that carried gratitude, respect, and recognition of the risk taken on his behalf. There were no grand speeches, no loud declarations. Only understanding, shared silently between two men who had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty together. "Safe," the Apache man said, his voice low, yet full of meaning. "All safe now." The rancher nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and emotion he had not allowed himself in years. For the first time, the weight of guilt and fear began to lift. The young man had returned to his people, to his family, and yet he had returned in a way that acknowledged the bond between them. Their shared experience had left a mark that neither time nor distance could erase. Over the next few days, the rancher learned more. The young man's family had been waiting, worried, and prepared to search far and wide. They thanked the rancher quietly, their faces serious, their words full of unspoken respect. They understood the risk he had taken and recognized the courage it required. The rancher felt a warmth he had not expected. In the midst of hardship and suspicion, this acknowledgement felt like a small redemption. Life on the ranch began to settle again, though it was never quite the same. The neighbors continued their whispers and authorities still asked questions, but the rancher no longer felt the same fear. He had acted rightly, and that knowledge gave him strength. He moved with calm assurance, working the land, tending the cattle, and living quietly but differently. The experience had shifted him, softened him, and reminded him that life was more than survival. It was about action, choice, and morality. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, the rancher sat on the porch of his small house, looking out over the land. Memories of the past months returned, every fearful night, every silent conversation, every risk taken under the stars. He thought of the young man, of the river crossing, of the hidden valley. He realized that the experience had not only changed the young man's life but had reshaped his own. Courage, he understood, was not about strength or weapons. It was about choosing to do right when it was hardest. The young man's story became part of the rancher's life, a story carried in his heart rather than spoken aloud. He would remember it every time he walked through the fields, every time he tended the animals, and every time he looked at the stars at night. It was a reminder that humanity could be found in unexpected places, that kindness could triumph over fear, and that trust could build bridges even across the widest divides. Months turned to years. The rancher continued his life on the land, quiet and steady. Occasionally, he would see riders in the distance, perhaps scouts or travelers, but his thoughts no longer carried fear for the young man. He trusted that the young man had returned to a safe life among his people, thriving in the freedom he deserved. The story of the night he helped the young man escape became a quiet legend in the region, not one told aloud, but remembered in actions, glances, and the way neighbors treated the rancher with cautious respect. He had risked everything for one person, and that risk had defined him more than anything else. He had chosen courage over caution, humanity over fear, and the act had changed both their lives forever. On quiet nights, when the wind moved through the trees and the stars reflected on the still river nearby, the rancher would remember the young man's hand on his shoulder, the calm strength in his eyes, and the silent understanding that had passed between them. He would feel the lasting warmth of that trust, the deep satisfaction of knowing he had done right. Though the land was harsh and the world often cruel, he learned that small acts of courage and compassion could make all the difference. The rancher lived with this knowledge every day, and it became his guide, shaping every decision, every moment, and every interaction. He had learned that true strength was in the choices made quietly, courageously, and with care for others. The young man never returned to the ranch permanently, but the bond remained. When the wind carried a familiar sound, when the sun reflected on the river, or when a horse ran calmly across the pasture, the rancher remembered. He remembered a life saved, trust earned, and courage tested. And he knew in the quiet of the desert nights that some actions, taken in silence and danger, could echo through a lifetime. The rancher had faced judgment, risk, and uncertainty, but he had also experienced redemption, peace, and understanding. He had learned the hardest lessons of life: to act when fear demanded inaction, to trust when doubt was strongest, and to see humanity in every soul, even those from different worlds. And in that understanding, he found the most profound freedom of all, not just for the young Apache man, but for himself.